everybody. Welcome to our second episode of the DNMC podcast. I'm Michael Oberhauser.
I'm Liz Hill.
And today our guest is Peter Dayton. Peter, why don't you say something about yourself?
It's a pleasure to be here, Michael and Liz. And it's good to see your faces, too, after more than a year. I think the last time we saw each other was in person at the District New Music Conference at Catholic University. That's right. Really a wonderful concert series and a wonderful time. But my name is Peter Dayton. I'm a Baltimore-based composer, and I have not been that connected, I would say, to the classical music scene of universities and new music festivals and conferences for a while now. I work at a nonprofit called Arts Education in Maryland Schools, and we work to deliver equitable access to arts education to all of Maryland's public school students. So that's our big mission, and I've been working there for nearly 3 years at this point. That's a little bit about me to get started.
Cool.
Thank you.
Is there anything that you've been doing differently in isolation, and anything that surprises you that's been different?
One of the unusual things is more of one-off than a habit, but I got married.
Congratulations.
Thank you so much. I mean, Doug and I had already been together for nearly 4 years at that point, and just tied the knot with in a really dumpy-looking courthouse room. But no, it was the right call, as Doug was really good at coining. It was always real, and now it's official. And so that was one thing that was sort of prompted by the pandemic. But on a slightly more pedestrian note, I took up about halfway through the summer, I began to do Duolingo Classic. It's either like Duolingo or baking bread, right? So I began to do Duolingo, and I've at this point been working on Japanese for about 200 days and really getting such a kick out of it. It's been such a wonderful experience. I love Japanese music, anime, a lot of it's a big sort of cultural, artistic touchstone for me. And so to begin to learn the language, and it's so very different and feels, it's really fascinating to look at it in terms of maybe some musical ideas about combinatoriality or things like that, because the way that characters are made, they're made from a lot of radicals where a mix of gestures and strokes come together to form different words. I was just saying this to Doug, where the word for yesterday, kino, has two parts to it. A word that's created from part of the character or the part of the characters for the verb to use. And then the other part is a little day. So it's almost like yesterday is a used day. And, and maybe that's just me in terms of making those connections. I'm sure that's not a real mnemonic for that language, but creating these associations, creating these cognitive linkages has been a really fun and interesting way to do it. And I handwrite all of my music, and so I've also been practicing writing all of it and just anything to get me away from a screen. Anything, even as we do this into a screen, anything to continue to engage with manual fine motor skills activities.
Is there any public space that you really miss visiting since we're like indoors so much? Is there a specific restaurant, specific park or anything?
So many places. I mean, we have done a really good job of doing distance picnics, like really, go to the park, open spaces, obviously good. Keep the masks on, there's a place in Baltimore, Silburn Arboretum, really beautiful. It used to be a historic mansion. It now belongs to the city. We've gone there a lot, but, I really miss so many places. There's so many. We've done a good job of continuing to give our money to restaurants that we really like, the ones that can do takeout, and we generally liked ones that could do takeout anyway, which is fortunate. But I miss going to the BSO. I live right across the street from the Baltimore Symphony, and that was one of the things I would brag about in living here. And now it's not something as easy as crossing the train tracks anymore. But really, just so many social spaces. I miss the Green Lantern in DC, gay bar in DC. I'd go down there at least once a month and see a lot of cool people, a lot of friends. Just can't do that. And that kind of place where you'd have a casual acquaintance kind of thing, where you'd see someone in a routine way that wasn't, that wasn't a coworker, and that wasn't, you know, obviously it's fun to hang out with friends, but there's also something that's really nice about an unfraught, just kind of like, hey, how's it going?
So what's been keeping you sane?
Well, I did mention that I had a husband, and Doug is an enormous part of that. I have a lot of rituals, but before that, I've just got to say that it's probably ultimately my privilege that keeps me sane. I have a job, and I have a nice living space. I haven't had any major medical issues. I don't struggle with any chronic issues in such a way that, like, my baseline quality of life is pretty good, and I've been able to maintain that while being able to give up a lot of the perks, you could say. So with that in mind, having someone to be able to talk to, which is an enormous privilege, having someone to be able to hug really keeps you sane. But I do a lot of rituals, and that's a big part of the stability that I've been able to maintain, is being able to do things in such a way that it's the positive side of days blurring together, because of course there is the weird time compression of always being inside your apartment, and there's definitely, I feel like it's often framed as a bad thing that, if you do a ritual so often, it just seems to become that every day becomes the same. Weeks seem to go by pretty fast, and while I'm counting down until it's my number drawn to get my vaccine jabs, not the worst thing in the world. So I've got my home workout 5 days a week. I do Duolingo every day, which, because I'm also writing it out, I will do a little flex for a moment and show my writing book, which I decorated myself. It's pretty, but I work on it every day, and work on writing out the sentence, sample sentences and that kind of stuff. So it really, I'm sure the camera doesn't focus well at all, but it helps. That's a ritualistic activity. Really helps. Those things. I've been playing a lot of vintage video games, both ones that I used to play when I was a little bit younger, as well as exploring new ones. I've been playing all these games that I hadn't played that are compatible with the system, which has been an interesting journey for me, because my start in music came from video game music, specifically the Final Fantasy series. I was over at a friend's house in middle school, and he put in Final Fantasy X, and I really had my young Frankenstein, oh, sweet mystery of life, at last I've found you moment. I had that moment with that game, and I found the piano collections for it, the sheet music, and I got all the other piano collections for the other Final Fantasy game series, but I hadn't played any of those other games until this summer. That's been a really fascinating sort of growth ritual and way, again, to stay sane.
Well, I feel like actually you've kind of organically answered our next two questions. So I'm gonna skip forward a little bit. But who or what is something that motivates or inspires you when your relationship with music or the music business is going through some turbulence?
That's a really interesting question, and I'm going to take a big pause here, just because I'm not sure I really have an answer. One of the things really that was an important part, I think, of my own journey as an artist and a person was simply stepping away from a world that I don't think I was cut out for. I don't think that I had probably the resilience to deal with what I see as the industry of either university music or new music. Neither of them. And so while I have participated in things like DC New Music Conference, which was really wonderful and a great experience and a good chance to kind of do a Halley's Comet flyby of the new music scene, I think my way of dealing with that has been maybe to not deal with it. So that's a particularly sort of avoiding answer, but I feel like within my own music making, I've managed to make, and partly because I have financed them myself, make opportunities for my music to be heard in spaces that I can bring people from my various communities to, can enjoy it. I usually get a recording out of it that can then go online. Whether or not other people engage with that, not as important. I had to get off the treadmill at some point, and my calves have been thanking me ever since.
Well, you did it again. You sort of dovetailed beautifully into our next question, which is about community that is not just for musicians. And so, how have you built a community that your music fits into, but is not just for musicians?
Yeah, that was a big step. Part of it was a mix of, as I said about middle school, I found an interest in music as a narrative and expressive form at that time. I then, through various piano teachers, found out more about 20th century classical music. The rest is somewhat history in terms of getting interested. But I went to a very good academic private school that was like, we're going to get you into a college. Everyone who goes to the school gets into a college. So heavily academically focused, barely an arts program, really like on life support the entire time. And so there wasn't really any way to explore that music besides messing around in Finale for myself. And so I went to Vanderbilt University and happened to sign up for a music class. I went as an English major, so clearly always sticking to the financially successful areas. It's a terribly cynical thing to say, but it gets a laugh, and it's unfortunately true in our late stage capitalism world. So I did that. I signed up for a music class, but I saw it was songwriting and elementary theory, and immediately saw from the required book list that I was like, this isn't what I was looking for. I was looking for something that would help me write piano trios, not help me write a song, a guitar ballad, which is a perfectly fine kind of music that I wasn't interested in pursuing at that point. And so I was able to take a music theory course that was about the Western classical idiom, and then from there realized that this is wonderful to have a musical community that was also enthusiastic about this. The first time in my life I was around other people my age who would geek out about Aaron Copland, and so I was able to transfer to the music school. So that period of being in a place where I could be with other people who cared about the thing, which was one of the most important aspects of my inner life, was a more recent development, and I only had a run of about 6 years of it, which took me from ages about 19 to 25, 26-ish when I completed my degree, my master's at Peabody. And even by then I was already kind of over the world of just new music. I'd done lots of festivals and conferences that I honestly thought were kind of full of shit, and that didn't seem to add anything to my life or to my happiness. It really took completely looking in other places. And for me, the big mix of activities that really got me there, a big part of it was sexual networking. When I began going on the apps, I preferred Scruff, but I met a whole range of people through hooking up, which I think is important to see as a valid social activity. Hard to do now, but for instance, I hooked up with an artist. He introduced me to a group of people, and I modeled a few times for them. I also became a sort of regular salon pianist and played music, including the Final Fantasy scores, during these live modeling sessions, and you get to meet a lot of interesting people from different backgrounds. It's a very mix between amateur and professional group of people, gay men who wanted to draw, and completely different audience who I never would have met through any other means. Through more of that kind of networking, I also became very involved in the leather scene in Baltimore, and that led to becoming Mr. Maryland Leather in 2016. Yeah, I did a pageant, if you'd like, and through that experience, I did during the I became Mr. Maryland Leather a good just 1 week before. No, it was the weekend before Trump won that election. That just the experience of being in of doing that year and being in that scene for a suburban white raised conservative Christian kid from southwestern Ohio was the biggest eye-opening, ear-opening, world-opening experience in terms of actually interacting with people of different races, different socioeconomic backgrounds, different gender identities, so many things. It really was an entire world-opening experience, and an experience through which I made a ton of friends all over the country, in different parts of the world. And so having a range of experiences that had nothing to do with music, that had to do with certain other shared interests, obviously. But I feel like I could have gotten some of the same experience if I joined an ultimate frisbee team, or if I had done volunteering at a homeless shelter, or if I had, if I'd done any of these other things where I just got out of the practice room and did these things. And I just wish that I had done, even if I'd like joined the Y when I was in Nashville, when I was doing my undergrad, right? If I just done something to meet people who weren't constantly wringing their hands about the sorts of minutia musical things that we rightly spend a lot of time doing, because that's part of the process of refining our craft and continuing to get better as artists. But it's got to have a limit. That's, I think, where the treadmill didn't work for me. The music thing, which is very personal, of course, it's personal for everyone. That's why we do it, because it matters so much to us. But the music thing for me is something that I certainly love to geek out about. But it couldn't be something that I could relax to. It's not where I could relax to geeking out about it. It's hard to have the full rounded social experience just within the scene of people who are all doing their latest version of a piece inspired by the Paul Clay Twitter machine.
So well said. That's great. And I think that kind of covers the next question, which was, how could we build that community as classical musicians for non-classical? So I think, Michael, if you agree, I think I'll move ahead. But I would like to say, I love to hear, or I really appreciate you making that point. It's so personal, the way that you found that you need to kind of open yourself up to the whole of life to be better connected to that one passion that you have. And I love to hear how that happens for everybody. So I really appreciate that.
Thank you. And it became an important sort of, it wrapped back around to music in a way where, for instance, at my birthday concert last year, and we're only a few weeks away from my birthday at this point, and it's strange to think that on February 22nd of 2020, I had nearly 100 people in a space in which we had an hour of vocal music where people were all singing with open effing mouths without masks. Pieces that was performed there. And this does tie to new music because this ties to DC New Music Coalition, because from the first conference you all did at Georgetown, I met James Mitchell Brown, who is a countertenor, and I employed their services during that for my Walt Whitman song cycle, which is for countertenor, tenor, baritone, and piano. It was a commission where the money fell through, of course. The commissioner specifically sort of reached out to me about writing the piece because of my slightly heightened profile as Mr. Maryland Leather. So I was on Facebook at the time, and he certainly noticed that and wanted to write a piece that explored non-monogamy or larger ideas of romantic community beyond the heteronormative binary. And so that piece came from my heightened gay sexual networking kind of profile. And so that the opportunities to work with musicians came back around from going away from music or doing things outside of music.
This is all, again, sort of related to what you just said, but what sort of collaborations have you been especially proud of?
Well, I guess that depends on the parameters of what a collaboration is. In some ways, I would say that some of my most recent work is the most truly collaborative that has been in terms of a not imbalanced power dynamic. In general, with my work, I would say that it proceeds along what might be fairly conventional lines of I write a piece, or someone asks me to write a piece, or I just write it on my own accord. The logistics negotiation process happens of trying to get that piece rehearsed and performed. I attend rehearsals, or am able to give input on rehearsals, or am not and get a recording later and rubber stamp it. But that process happens where my word is taken with great value as to the interpretation of the music that I have written. It's presented and then it's received. But two recent projects have been much more of a give and take in a way that I have been unused to, but interested in exploring and happy to have as experiences. One is for a show that is still up. I have no idea when this podcast is going to air, and if it's after February 15th, this is not relevant. But Baltimore-based theater group Single Carrot Theater is putting on a sort of a phone teleplay, if you will, but a phone-based dramatic experience called Healthy Holly's Hidden Hideaway, which is a sort of burn after reading level, incredibly acerbic, funny, zany riff on the Healthy Holly Catherine Pugh corruption scandal. Also tying into Catherine Pugh's very notable overnight removal of Confederate statues from around Baltimore. So I did the music for that phone experience, and it was a really fascinating thing to work completely outside of almost every element that I'm used to, one of which is, again, a kind of classical concert music, clearly connected to the Western classical music tradition kind of sound, and going for things that are very genre specific. Like one of the things that I was asked to create, it did end up on the cutting room floor, phone waiting music. And if you ever asked me if I write phone waiting music in my life, I would have said absolutely not. But it was a fun project. And so it was fun to create something that sort of makes your skin crawl with how empty it is, because it's a fun challenge to embody something like that. And how do you write mysterious music about a Confederate statue coming to life? That's a very interesting challenge. I never thought I would deal with, or I won't spoil too many things, but the parameters of the story were such that I got to explore a lot of different elements that I never thought I would. And I did it all in GarageBand, which I had never used before in my life, because I am a kind of technophobic person when it comes to my music. I've done a few electronic-ish pieces in in Audacity, but definitely think of myself as an acoustic instrumental composer. So doing all of that in Audacity was a big thing. And then also just having a feedback process where I'd produce something and then get the direction of, that's not really what we were looking for at all, and have to go through a process of revising it and taking it back and getting closer or not, and continuing to do that. And then the time frame of that was pretty tight. It was a very fast turnaround. I probably started writing music around December 19th, and it all was done by about January 3rd.
Oh, wow.
Wow.
So and much more music got written than got included based on the evolving. It's a very fluid process for the script, for the direction, for all of it. And so working with a theater company that already is not interested in producing Shakespeare. They're doing experimental stuff. They're doing community created theater. Working within the flexible process of DIY theater was probably the big one that I'll say.
I think that's sort of an interesting point about collaborations in general for all musicians, though. Most of the time for, people who are solely instrumentalists out there who like playing new music, composers like it when you talk to them about things. And even if it's, negative criticism, that could lead to something that you will enjoy more and hopefully will turn into a better performance then. So I think it's nice how people who are not classical musicians are more likely to speak up about their opinions about things when it comes to music.
Absolutely. And I think there's a bias towards the idea, again, the perception of the composer as genius or as kind of like radio tower to the gods. It comes through in all of these very subtle ways where it's not obviously no one thinks I'm a genius, but it is possible to likely that if I'm writing a piece for them, that they might be like, well, that's his vision. And so that's what I need to respect, and it's for me to question. There have been a few cases in terms of pieces that I've written for people where there was one case where just it's like, this is not possible for me as a vocalist, and so we figured out a solution. But apart from that level of like, this does not work for me, I'm not really used to that kind of thing. And I guess now I'll mention the only other recent instance of this, which was writing a piece for my little sister's wedding, which is going to be happening in September, we hope, in person. But I wrote, they wanted a piece for string quartet, they wanted a recessional, and we did this whole back and forth process of, I said, well, what are some, give me some attributes of things that you would like to hear. And then I gave them a list of pieces for string quartet that I thought embody those attributes. They wrote back to me basically saying, none of those really capture what we were looking for. A lot of back and forth there. I began writing a piece. I realized it was too fussy, complicated, harmonically goopy, and then decided, completely did something else. And it's interesting because we went back and forth. My sister's fiance, I almost said betrothed. How my little sister's fiance is a musician, is a choral musician, and so there was a background in music there where we could kind of get into the score itself. And they like went through and highlighted portions where like, I'm not sure about that. This section I'm really not quite sure about. And that was very different. And it was an experience where I definitely had a bit of a stoic face on of just like, okay, just processing it, because it's I felt the resistance of like, no, there's a reason I wrote that. And yeah, that's a kind of gritty moment right there, but it's for the payoff where you get back to a big major chord. Can't all be major chords, right? But there was one particular section that we were really stuck on, and it turned out part of my impatience at various points was because I knew that the realization, the issues of some of the parts that they pointed out as being like, that seems kind of abrupt or something, was because of the MIDI, because the MIDI processing of an articulation was particularly jarring or something, or it wasn't capturing the mix of a live performance. But there was one part where I'd written a very rich, texturally dense section at a kind of climax moment, and they just did not like the harmonic palette I was using, and it took me a few times, and I came to a result that I like. It's kind of like doing one of the three different endings of Clue, of that movie, where it's great when Miss Scarlet does it, it's great when Mrs. Peacock does it, and to have to explore, and that time in a much more in a world that was much more my wheelhouse otherwise, right? Like with Healthy Holly, that's just completely at sea, and I'm happy to hear from someone that that's not what they wanted, because I'm just giving this a first shot as well. But with writing something like this, I'm like, well, this is what I do. And so then to have someone say, no, we don't want to have the C acoustic scale there. We want something simpler. It was a fascinating experience getting to the point of working with someone else's, not even quite vision for it, but the known unknown of like, well, we know we want something that's not that, and that's kind of more like this. So try again.
Yeah.
Completely different collaborative experience.
Yeah. That's extremely challenging. And probably since, she's family, she's your sister, that adds a whole nother level to it too.
Definitely changes the power dynamic.
Yeah, definitely. Wow. Well, our next question is kind of a 3-part. I'm going to throw all 3 parts at you, but if you need me to remind you of any of them, just let me know. How do the scenes in Baltimore and DC differ from one another? How do they differ from other places where you lived? You mentioned you went to Vanderbilt, so maybe can you compare, or how is it different from Tennessee? And do you have any ideas on how to help bridge this distance that we have from DC to Baltimore?
Well, I feel like for the first 2, I'm going to be able to kind of collapse them, partly because I feel like it's only within my time in Baltimore that I've become a non-embryonic human. Like I've fully developed into a professional adult in basically any capacity, but as well in a music one as well. My musical community experiences at Vanderbilt were entirely based on my enrollment in a program there and my participation in the social and musical nerdery that was my time there. And it's been interesting to engage with it a little more afterwards. I went back for my 5-year discussions there, which ended up in a performance of my chamber opera happening the next year at a microbrewery, like a micro cidery, if that's a word, place. It was fascinating. And I just actually had a piece performed at Vanderbilt on Monday, release of a new album. I guess this is part where I do a little product pitch. The glare is going to completely obscure the album, so I'll take the booklet out. Hopefully that'll help. Vanderbilt Virtuosi. Oh, good, the glare didn't kill it.
Wow. Yeah.
So that was a complete surprise. But the oboe professor just contacted me and said, "Hey, I'd like to do one of your pieces on this album, this recording project." That was last summer. So it's interesting to see how those communities or those connections are more of a tectonic time scale than an immediate time scale. But Baltimore is the first place that I really felt like I was establishing a musical and artistic community. And I unfortunately have to bow out of answering what I think about the DC musical scene, because my only experiences with it have been curated by the District New Music Coalition, which have been great experiences. So I have general great things to say about DC New Music, thanks to y'all. But in the way of being able to bridge that divide, that's really tough, I think, because DC is somewhere between more ambulatory and public transportation based. Baltimore, partly thanks to Larry Hogan's continued allegiance with white supremacy, really opposes public transportation, opposes ways to facilitate the same kind of travel. And so we're kept in a much more car-based world. And COVID completely throws a series of wrenches into this as well. But maybe, in fact, COVID collapses distance in a way where, because we're all doing things virtually, it's easier to get to something that is DC based, or that is at least curated by a DC organization or a DC ensemble. And so I wonder if a solution, without being able to give any more clear specifics, if a solution lies in the ability to broadcast rather than having to be constrained to in-person experiences.
So, as you said, you're the programs and operations director for arts education in Maryland schools. But can you tell us a little bit more about the organization's work as a whole, and including the resource Artlook Maryland?
Oh, yay! I get to talk about work. No, it's a real pleasure for my first paycheck job to be able to do something that I really care about and that I didn't necessarily see myself doing, certainly when I began to formulate the idea of a career. Being able to work at Ames has been great, and the direction of the organization has changed with the leadership changing there during my time. And so there's been a big uptick and shift that seems to have been perfectly in coordination with the times about the importance of equity. But in terms of our work in total, it has a lot of different components to it. And being brought in as the programs and operations manager, my role is more about what we put out in terms of experiences for people. I organized a number of community listening sessions with the new executive director coming in. We wanted to get a statewide community-based sense of where arts educators were. I made the joke earlier about how the arts don't make money, as if that matters to the total value of the arts, but it does in late stage capitalist America, where the entire point of schools is actually sort of putting you through the assembly line to get you into the exploited labor force. So, it's standardized test scores that matter. It's not about the kind of whole child development, mix of social emotional learning, critical thinking, associations making, empathy developing kind of thing that can be part of a quality arts experience. So on my end, some of the things I'm most involved with is organizing the events we do, like those listening sessions. We did an anti-racist arts education symposium back in November, which was really wonderful because the speaker was Bettina Love, who is an important figure in abolitionist education. With Ames, I do that kind of stuff. Professional development is another portion of what we do, because if we're talking about delivering quality arts education, we need to be actively involved in making sure teachers have access to the resources to be able to deliver education that's based in national arts learning standards, that is meeting children's needs by being appropriately culturally contextualized. And certainly one of the other aspects of this symposium was about anti-racist pedagogy and dismantling racist ideas within education as a practice, rather than just trying to increase representation within curricula of non-white artists or the contributions of communities of color or historically resilient communities. So those are the things that I'm directly involved with. Artlook is something that I don't necessarily deal with on a day-to-day basis, but it is a statewide data platform that we host and that we have driven as a way to increase transparency and empower communities in order to make available the resources of the data of individual schools, so that someone in one of the pilot communities like Baltimore City can look at the school that their child attends, see how many hours their child receives of arts education, which arts disciplines of the 5 arts disciplines that Maryland statutes articulate, which are media arts, dance, theater, visual arts, and music, how many of those are being offered, the percentage of students that have access to them, which grade levels, that kind of thing, as well as any partnerships with outside organizations to deliver arts experiences outside of the classroom, or to have like visiting teaching artists, that kind of thing. So it's a tool in order to increase that kind of transparency and to provide the information so that communities can empower themselves to better advocate for their own needs when it comes to being able to offer arts education experiences to their kids. And it's also an opportunity for teaching artists to better connect with schools. That's one thing that our research and our work has shown, is that they're often the relationships between teaching artists and schools are often personal relationship based, such that a teaching artist has a connection with a principal at a school, and that's why they go to that school, because they have that connection and they can get in there, and probably a lot of the red tape is expedited. But there's a lot of institutional turnover. That principal leaves, suddenly the teaching artist doesn't have a school to go to anymore because they don't have that connection anymore. And also they might be missing opportunities to connect with educational communities that are either closer to them or that also have the need for that particular kind of experience. To create a networking path where you can go to where an arts partner, which is a teaching artist, or an organization which offers arts programming for kids, can go to the profile of a school, see what kinds of partnerships they currently have or they are looking for, and be able to reach out to a school liaison, someone who has volunteered through their participation in the Art Look program to be the person to field those sorts of inquiries to see if they can connect with them, so that it can be more, I'm not going to say something like merit-based, but the connections can be less about just who you know already, and allow more people to get more feet in more doors and more arts experiences for more students. So that's the overall view of Art Look Maryland. We're really making a renewed effort to get everyone on board with it, because it's such a, it took me a long time to explain it just now. It takes a long time to get all the details out there. Teachers are already dealing with so much. Administrators are already dealing with so much, and plenty of administrators aren't that interested in the arts beyond thinking of it as daycare and craft time.
I'm curious, and this is not this, I'm going a little off script here, but your work, it sounds very interesting and is obviously very important to times today, and just in general, like helping to build that legacy of children who grow up with an appreciation of the arts and who can find a way to use it in their lives. So I'm wondering, how do you find your work life in that aspect informs your compositional life, or the other way around too? Like how is the balance between these two aspects of your life, your working life?
It's an interesting question, because it also, like another question earlier where I was just like, well, that just doesn't apply. I can just sort of, I have the work and I have my musical work. I don't really like kids, and I hate to put it that bluntly, but I never wanted to be a teacher of any kind. I was a kid, and I was a pretty angsty kid too, so I certainly understand and empathize, and it's you don't need to sell me on the importance of the arts for kids. I lived it, I know it, and it just makes sense. And I think what I appreciate about it and how it connects is that it fills out the other side of maybe my own participation in the community at large, in terms of the artistic community or audience that I've built for myself. That's kind of based around me and my own activities. And so this is more truly community oriented. We've been a big proponent of and part of the coalition of organizations that's been pushing for the veto override that's just happening for the Blueprint for Maryland, or Kerwin bill. It's a huge comprehensive piece of legislation that could totally transform education as a whole, in addition to, and just the resources that are available in order to make the quality of education more equitable across communities, to attempt to rectify some of the systemic racist injustices that have occurred in terms of the quality and funding of education that's available to historically resilient communities. So I mean, this is a chance to really get into making a difference, and making a difference through something that I'm on board for. The main mission of the organization is something I care deeply about, and it just rounds out the other side of where I get to have my art for me, and it doesn't need to be my income, and then my work gets to be something that is morally fulfilling. It's just been a chance to do something else that also I care deeply about, and feels like it's part of a wider conversation about issues regarding equity or just the quality of education. When I began to engage in the arts, that's when I really began to, it unlocked learning for me in a way where I became a better student because I had things that I could be good at, because I wasn't good at many things before I discovered music. And having the confidence of being good at anything gives you more confidence to try anything else, or to even apply yourself a little more.
We have one last question that we're going to start asking all of our guests. What's one thing that you would like to ask our next guest, no matter who it is?
Honestly, I think maybe what I would ask is, can I give you a hug? And obviously if they say no, I would not. But just the very fact of being able to physically connect and inhabit the same spaces with people again, outside of the oh my God moment paranoia of being in the elevators of my apartment building with someone who's not my husband. To have that again would mean the world. And so I know that's not the kind of question that you were going for, but that's still my answer of, can I give you a hug?
love that.
We will let you know if you can give our next guest a hug.
Yeah. Hopefully that can happen one day too.
Yes. I am grateful to be included in even if it's past the asteroid belt, I'm grateful to be included in your solar system.
Thank you.
We're happy to have you here.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for joining us, Peter. And we will look forward to seeing you in person sometime, hopefully not too far in the future.
Yeah, that happy day is getting closer and closer.
Yes.
Stay safe, y'all.
Thank you. Same to you.
Bye.
Bye.